And it was really difficult once got to the age of adolescence. Sometimes they were so disconnected and disengaged that it was a battle. And so in my mindset was, okay, I'm gonna go and challenge myself to work with elementary aged youth. And so I was a mental health therapist in the schools at an elementary school. For the first time doing mental health therapy with kindergartners, if we can begin to imagine that, right? Like kindergartners, wow, you're gonna go and do some mental health therapy with kindergarten. What's going on in a kindergartner's life that you have to go and do therapy? And so, but those are things that we don't really kind of think about, right? And so I was doing therapy in elementary school and middle school. And so when COVID happened, that's around the time that I transitioned back to Omaha, Nebraska, and started to work at Project Harmony. And so the reason I came back to Omaha, Nebraska was because my parents are here. And I'm the oldest son in the family, and my parents are a little bit more higher at risk. Um, and so for me, it was like a no-brainer, right? I have to come back and be supportive and be close to my family. And so that's kind of what brought me back to Omaha. Um, and see, I kind of share all these little details and, and it's small details, but um, this kind of flows with the subject matter that we're talking about today. We're talking about engagement. How do we begin to engage a community? And specifically, we're kind of identifying the community of Latina young women. How do we begin to engage them? And so in order to begin to engage Latina young women, we have to understand that we're not just engaging an individual, we're engaging a family and we're engaging a community. So that's one of the most important things that we have to begin to note down, right? A lot of times when we provide these services in these different agencies, it's very, oftentimes can be very individualistic. We're gonna work one-on-one with the individual. And it kind of discredits or disconnects from the family system. And we don't take into account the community. Because all these things are interconnected. And so that's something that I want us to begin to think about. I'm not just engaging an individual, I'm engaging a family, I'm engaging a community. And what does that mean? And so these questions are questions that we should be asking ourselves. So today, in no particular order, I've dotted down a couple key points and components that I want to really address. And I want to commend my colleagues that are on and that are going to be speaking here in a little bit too. Because when it comes to engagement, the colleagues that are going to be presenting, they're the experts, the expertise. I oftentimes tell my colleagues at the Latino Center of the Midlands, you guys need to be doing these types of presentations because you are the experts. And that's a fact. And so today, on this first slide here, I think what's really important is to begin to really keep in mind migration history. And even before we get into that, like just a basic definition for culture. I'm not going to give you a textbook definition, but when we think of culture, we think of like a shared values, right? Norms and shared values. So when I'm working with any family, any individual that's coming through, I'm taking this into consideration. So where are they coming from? Is their background from Mexico? Is their background from El Salvador? Is their background from Guatemala? Through my job right now, I work with a large population of families that come from Guatemala and El Salvador. And so my understanding, and I know that overall, their experiences are going to be completely different. Now, when I have families that are coming from Guatemala, a lot of times English is not their first language. Spanish is not their first language. So if Spanish isn't their first language, what is their first language? Well, then oftentimes they have their native indigenous languages that they speak, their dialects. And so I have to be aware of that, and I have to have an understanding of that, because it's going to set the tone, right? Because when I'm aware of that, it tells me a little bit of kind of what's happened in their communities. So I'm kind of aware. Um, I'm aware that you know, if they're coming from rural areas, mental health services or social services, they're not going to be a norm. It's going to be a foreign concept. Um, Oftentimes, for some of these families, and these are stories that I've heard for years and years. I've been in this field for 13 years and as a professional. And so the stories that I've heard are over and over and over, and there's so many commonalities, right? But oftentimes when people have been detained in ICE detention, right, there's traumatic experiences that happen, maybe along the way. When I was in San Jose, there was a time frame when there was many youth that were coming from Central America on their own, caravans of youth that were coming to the border. Um, and these were little kids sometimes. And so kind of beginning to understand that, like, okay, these are experiences that are traumatic, that are gonna have an effect on a child's emotional development. Oftentimes we think of physical development through the stages of development physically, but we forget about emotionally. So um, for example, I'll use an example where a father is no longer in the home, and because there's a separation, and there's a young child that is 7 years old, and the father tells the young boy, "You're going to be the man of the house now because I'm not there." So we think about that emotional impact on the development of this 7-year-old. Because when you're 7 years old, you should be playing with toys and watching cartoons. And so, again, I think that's a real critical aspect and thing to consider on migration history. So when we take that into consideration, we're also considering the different generations. Um, Now, when we have families that are migrating, and then we have the first generation that maybe is born here in the United States, oftentimes there's kind of a disconnect and a conflict that arises, right? And this is something that we'll kind of jump in another slide, but I want to really touch upon this. So when families are migrating here, oftentimes there's this feeling that there's no voice, right? That they can't be heard. And this can be something, again, that has happened because of generational trauma, community trauma. There's unstable government. Again, there's no support services. Um, so I think of an example of through my work right now, oftentimes a lot of my cases are because of sexual abuse. And so sometimes it's very common for me to see trends of generational sexual abuse that has happened. And so the why does this happen? Well, this happens because there are maladaptive behaviors, there's uh, maladaptive coping skills, um, because people are hurting, right? These things aren't normal. So we can't go into our mindset that, oh, these communities are suffering. These are normal things that happen in these communities. And the reality is it's not. These are normal things that happen when people are hurting and there's trauma. And so the example that I kind of provide is that a mom shares that, when I came to the United States and I had my kids, I didn't want this cycle to continue. I didn't want my kids to ever feel that they were abused like I was. And the mom tells me, back where I lived, there was no justice. We couldn't go to the police. We couldn't go and um, get help. So our only automatic response is that we have to just continue. We continue so that we can survive. Um, so those are things that we have to be mindful of, right? These experiences that have happened in the past. So what has built up to get us to present day? What are experiences? And so if I have families that are migrating to the United States of America, Usually it's because, um, there's things that are happening in their homeland where they're willing to risk their lives, willing to risk everything that they have for something just a little bit better. And what does that look like? Sometimes that little bit better is three families living in an apartment, working 7 days a week, trying to save money, minimum wage, working at a meatpacking plant where there's no COVID leave, where everyone's getting sick and they're threatening if you don't come to work, then you might get fired. Um, so that we have to think about those things. So these are macro level things that we have to consider. Again, if we're talking about quality care, yeah, you can provide services and set the bar very low. But if you're talking about that you want to provide quality care engagement, these are things that have to be considered and thought about. As a mental health therapist, I'm doing one-on-one individual work, very micro-based work, right? But I know that in my mindset to provide quality care, I have to be knowledgeable about the macro level because the macro level factors are going to influence the services that I'm providing to these families and to these individuals and to these communities. Um, so I think that's just, again, and this is in no particular order, but a very critical point to kind of mention. Carmen, if we could kind of go to the next. So one thing that really, another really important key point is really understanding, and I use this terminology because this is like the social work or mental health terminology, but the collective family system. So when we have families from Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, Central America, even South America, family functioning is on a collective spectrum. So collective, what does that mean? That means that we are all as one. Think of it as a circle. We're all part of this circle and we all have a role in order for this family to function on a daily basis, right? And so this is one of the most important protective factors. This is like our biggest strength. This is what keeps families going. So examples of this, right? I hear stories and stories that talk about how maybe in Mexico, before the person had to go to school, they'd wake up super early and have to take the farm animals out to pasture. And then they'd have breakfast, go to school, after school, come back, go and take care of the animals. And so there was a whole process to it. Sometimes youth would have to go to the market and sell items to help with the family income. So everyone played a role, no matter what the age was, even oftentimes as little kids. And so here in the United States, we have a different kind of mentality, right? In the United States, it's like, oh, you can't have a child, child labor laws. And it wasn't even about child labor, but it was, again, the family functioning together in order to survive, right? Now, I'll use an example of this happens oftentimes, right? There's maybe a teenager that gets their first job and starts to work. And in some families, they're very fortunate enough where the teenager can save that money and doesn't have to contribute to the family. But in other families, it's possible and common that the parents might ask for some financial support. And it's not that the family is trying to be abusive, but it's, again, that collective mindset where we're trying to move forward as a whole. So it's beginning to understand this functionality, right? Because if we don't understand this functionality, we can make the mistakes as service providers that are coming into a home, that are meeting with a family, and we can, disconnect. And that's something that we don't want, especially if we're trying to help people. We want them to have trust. We want them to feel connected. So one of the obstacles that we see, though, with this collective family system um, is that when we see the different generations. So parents will oftentimes have this mentality is that we're a whole, we're a collective. Together we succeed together, we suffer together, everything's together. However, when children are being raised here in the United States, there's a different kind of mentality. Now we're looking at more of an individualistic, um, individualism. That's what we're kind of taught. And so then you see this clash, and there's a conflict in these youth, because at home we have this collectivist approach, and then at school and on TV, on social media, it's very individual. Now, when we say individual, what does that mean? It says, hey, you go to school, you get your good grades, you kind of move up the ladder to success, right? You go to college, you get your degree, you get your job, you get your house, you get your, you, it's what I get, what I get, what I get. You get the promotion, you get the next promotion, and it's very, again, what can I achieve? Um, where within our communities, oftentimes, again, it's collective, and it's not necessarily just what can I do for myself as an individual, but what can I do for myself, for my family. Another prime example of this, Omaha South High School has an amazing soccer team. Amazing, every year they're playing in the state championships, state finals, and um, recently, in their most recent championship, one of the young boys, the young man, was interviewed by the Omaha World Herald, or they got a quote from him. And I remember this very clearly, and it was like, okay, that's perfect. It's a perfect example. The quote that this young man said when he won this championship, his exact, maybe not exact words, but he said, I did this for my family and for my community. And I was like, boom, that's the perfect example of when we talk about collectivism. I won this championship for my family and my community. And you could see it at these soccer games. All of South Omaha was at these soccer games because there was that connection. Oftentimes, in our communities, maybe that people will have a great pride in, their country's flag, their neighborhood. Um, and that pride is because there's a connection to something bigger. When I graduated from South High School, there was a woman by the name of Margarita Lopez who worked at the Chicano Awareness Center, which today is the Latino Center of the Midlands. And at that time, when I was at South, she would go into South High School and she would work with youth. And I was one of those kids that was on the tightrope, one bad decision away from having a different life trajectory. But because of the support systems that I had in place, I was able to, make the right choices. And it was kind of, I think it was my last day of high school, and we're sitting, we're standing out in front of the parking lot right there on 24th Street next to Jacobo's. And Miss Lopez looks at me and says, Salvador, you made it. And at this time in 2002, it was kind of a fact because of my peer circle. I was one of the few, very few, that ended up going to college, that ended up choosing a path that didn't involve drugs or incarceration or other activities that were not safe or healthy. But she said, Salvador, you made it. And I'll never forget the words, because she said, never forget where you come from. Never forget where you come from. And where I came from was not only South Omaha, but was where I come from is Mexico. My family, the roots that are deep and connected. To this day, I continue to go visit. I just came back from Christmas vacation from visiting my grandfather's home. And those are words that remain here. Never forget where you come from. So throughout my experiences and journeys, that's always kind of led me to serve and work in this capacity of trying to help people. Um, so from my point of view, I'm a collective, I have a collective approach when I provide mental health therapy, because these are families that I know. Maybe I don't know them personally, but I know them because they're from my community. Because I know what it's like to be first generation. I know what it's like for me to have my father, who's worked in the meatpacking plant for 40 years, 40 years. And when all this COVID stuff happened, in 40 years, he's never had a paid sick day. I used to think he was Superman because he would never miss work. But the reality was he'd never miss work because he was afraid to lose his job. 40 years of that. And so he's so close to retiring. And so, and even as a grown adult, I have a master's degree. I'm at the top of my field, licensed independent clinical social worker. But I still feel that, right? I feel the pains of my community. And so that pushes me to do the work that I do. So it's understanding. Earlier, I mentioned that some of my peers ended up incarcerated or with substance use. And I have a little point here that I think is really important. And understanding that these are not cultural values. When I read a social work book, there's going to be a chapter or paragraph that's going to talk about machismo and how machismo is a cultural value. Now, I'll sit here and I'll tell you that's false. That's so false that we need to erase that from our mindset. Machismo is not a part of my culture. It's not a cultural value. What machismo is the result of trauma, of generational trauma. When trauma happens over and over and over, and we begin to utilize maladaptive coping skills, then it begins to look like culture, and people confuse it. And they'll say, oh, that's cultural. And it's like, no, that is not cultural. That's the result of trauma. And so my work is to help demystify that stuff, to help people understand, hey, that's not your culture. That's because you're hurting and it's been happening for generations. And we're trying to stop that. So it's beginning to, again, to have these foundational understandings right here in your brain when you begin to engage people. Carmen, if we could go to the next. So connecting to, this is where we come into play, right? Whether it's mental health, social services, whatever nonprofit support services that we're providing. Again, I touched on this briefly, but these are foreign concepts that, people don't have an understanding of systems. There's been two things that have happened, because sometimes people say, well, they're not engaging. Families don't want to engage. There's two things that have happened, and I think this is important for us as providers to understand and to keep in mind. Again, two things that often happen, that these can be survival skills, right? One, that when we've experienced trauma, we've had to utilize we minimize trauma. We've had to minimize it. People will say, no pasa nada. It's no big deal, nothing happened. When these real terrible, traumatic things have happened, whether it's physical abuse, violence, sexual abuse, where we've had to, again, to survive, I've had to kind of disconnect from it, disassociate, right? That's the other piece. So oftentimes we'll see a minimization and disassociation. Minimization will minimize the problems, will make them seem less than what they are. And the other piece is like when there's an elephant in the room and we ignore the elephant, we disconnect from the problem, because these are things that are survival skills that have helped us to survive. And so when I work with my families, I tell them, you know what, they're helpful, they're effective, because we've had to use it and it's helped us. But guess what, if we use this all the time and it becomes, this is the only skill that we use, then it's not going to be healthy, and it's going to go across generation to generation to generation. So we have to be aware of it, being mindful of this. So it's important. Um, on here, I talk about spending an extended amount of time in explaining processes and providing psychoeducation. So critical. Most of my therapy for the first couple of months is providing that. I'm helping them to understand. And I use this example of a tree. We have a tree and there's a rotten apple. And a lot of times I think agencies with their intervention and support services, what we try to do is we want to get rid of this rotten apple. Let's take this rotten apple off, right? Because we want life to be better. So this apple is rotten, let's take it off. Well, what happens is that in this apple tree, there's some roots. And some of these roots are no good. They're not functioning for us. They're poison, they're rotten, they're no good. When we just take an apple off the tree, and if we don't really address or focus on the root cause, this apple will keep coming back. And so in my work, and this is where the psychoeducation piece comes, is helping them to understand the root cause, right? So I have to spend an extended amount of time of explaining, well, what is trauma? It took me years to really figure out, like, how do I explain this to people? How do I explain it to my family? How do I explain it to these kids? Because I couldn't understand it. And I had my own traumas that I had experienced. So it took me a lot of work on myself, a lot of work in understanding my community, my families. But eventually I found a way to be able to describe these concepts. So really taking time, explaining the process. You know, sometimes and we have to be adaptive in how we explain things. And I'll come back to these concepts here because I think the next slide, but I want to finish this one here. The systems can be confusing, even for us English speaking people. I have a master's degree and this stuff's confusing. You know, we have all these different providers, all these different meetings, MDTs, and, you know, and there's this agency and that agency. And oftentimes what I see is even the providers are getting crisscrossed. And so it's very confusing. And we can imagine for families that don't speak Spanish or English, how difficult it could be. So that's where the key piece is that we have to be able to really take our time and explain things. There was another key piece there that I really want to point out. A lot of times this gets thrown out so often, and it's a true comment, but we talk about system fatigue, which is important. I guess, you know, it's important to be mindful of, but another key piece that I think is important is provider fatigue. So what happens when I have providers over and over and over that are, you know, that I'm disconnected from, that, you know, have not been the best providers, that have not been the best support. And the sad truth is that there are some people that shouldn't be in the field, right? There are some people that want to, they're lazy, you know? They don't want to put the extra effort that is required to provide the quality care. And so this has an impact on people's lives, right? Our job is very serious, right? Sometimes people work in the field because it helps us to feel good. We're helping people. But we have to be mindful that these are people's lives. And so these are children that are being affected. And sometimes our actions have direct consequences. And so as providers, we have to be mindful of that. As supervisors, we have to be mindful of that, right? So again, we can set a bar very low, or we can choose to really set the bar high to provide quality care. Okay, Carmen. Now, one of the things I think that's really important is, again, when we're talking about connection. There's a difference between connecting and having rapport. When I am connected, And what I did to start out, and I did this in a very simple way. Usually I take a lot more time, but because of time constraints, um, I started out by telling you who I was. So you got a piece of my story, a piece of kind of who I was, and maybe that drew you in, and you felt connected, right? You're like, oh, well, I grew up in South Omaha. Oh, well, man, I lived in Washington, D.C., or I did policy, or I've been to the West Coast. One of the things, and I'll use this example, I was asked to go give a keynote speech at the University of Iowa years ago for Hispanic Heritage Month. And so I come out and I'm giving this keynote to university students, and I tell my story of growing up as a Mexican young man, first generation in Omaha. And I talk about going to Mexico and traveling in a caravan every Christmas, and what it was like to be with my grandma, and how my grandma would make me refried beans with chorizo, and how she would make toast and put butter and margarine and put sugar on it. And that was her special little treat for me as a kid. How my grandma would pray for me and read the Bible to me and things like that, right? That those feelings of being connected. Um, and so through my story, it's very much this Mexican experience. When I was done with my speech, there was a young man that came up right away, and he shook my hand and thanked me for my words. And he said, man, I could relate to your story so much. And so at that time, I kind of took a step back, like, huh? Because the young man that came up to me, from my point of view and what I was seeing, he was white, and he appeared like he was from a small farm town in Iowa. And so I'm like, how is my story of being Mexican growing up, how could he relate so much to it, being a white guy from small town, farm town, Iowa? But what I understood was that he also had a grandma, and his grandma would cook for him, and his grandma would pray with him, and his grandma and his family would take camping trips. So what happened there was that we had this human connection, right? We connected at the human level. And it wasn't that we had the similar experiences, but we had that similar feeling. And so when I talk about rapport versus connection, in our communities, we're very connected, a very connected community. And so if we're trying to build trust, if we're trying to build buy-in, and if we want people to engage in services, what's going to help us is to have that connection. So what I tried to do in the very beginning, in a very short, fast manner, was conocimiento, right? This introduction. And it's not even an introduction, because in English, that word just downplays it. A conocimiento is to get to know someone. It's to sit down, have a cup of coffee, and really connect. And so when families and youth begin to know a little bit about who you are and why you're there, that can make the difference. But oftentimes, as we go through life, we're so disconnected. We're even taught at school, they say, don't share about your life. Don't share about who you are. Don't do that. You can't do that. Like, it's not good. You have to stay separated from your client. But I ask us, and so this is where, again, you have to think. So I'm here learning about some of the most intimate things in a person's life. I'm here trying to help a person in their healing journey, but they can't know anything about me, right? Those things don't go hand in hand. It's like putting a triangle into a circle shape. There's a disconnect. So again, it's being mindful of these things. What kind of support services am I wanting to provide? I can build rapport, but can I build connection, right? Again, I bring up that factor of psychoeducation, such a critical role. In my therapy, oftentimes people say, well, no one ever sat down and explained to me what depression was. They just said I had it. I never really understood it. And no one ever really explained trauma to me. What is that? Um, so a lot of times the way I utilize my how can I define things and describe things? It's through storytelling. I've given you examples, parts of my life, part of my story, um, but stories that help us to really begin to understand. For trauma, I tell them that we're going for a walk and a big dog is running at us and it's about to bite us. What do? Fight, flight, freeze. And I explain those and I say, well, why would you run? Well, because my brain tells me to. And so I talk about the five senses. So your eyesight and your ears, your senses tell you there's danger and it's not safe. And so your brain automatically responds and says, run. And I explain how that functions and how that works. And I help them to understand, well, why is your daughter fighting at school all the time? Because her brain, before she was sexually abused, her brain would tell her to freeze up. And so when she was sexually abused, her brain said, freeze. And she was hurt. And now, after this experience, her brain says, when you freeze, it doesn't help, you get hurt. So now her brain is on fight mode. And so now she's very aggressive at home, at school, and that's her trauma brain, and she's not aware of it. And she doesn't understand that. But now I've taught you. And so now you're kind of aware of it and you understand it so you can better support her, right? So taking the time to kind of use these examples and explain can make the biggest difference. So again, the lost in translation, this all connects. You can translate some stuff in Spanish, but it's not gonna make sense. They asked me to teach EMDR, right? EMDR therapy, it's a modality. It's a very worldwide used therapy for trauma. And so I'm sitting here and I'm like, trying to explain it in Spanish to my clients and I can't. Direct translation, it's not computing. And so I have to, and I get frustrated and say, this isn't working. So I have to kind of adjust and adapt and find ways to best explain things. And I'm trying to explain, they have a concept where they say, you have to imagine a safe box where you can place all your traumas in this box and put them away until next time when we address our traumas. And so trying to explain that and just directly translating and it just doesn't compute. So we have to be mindful of that. Sometimes we think that we have an interpreter and we can just, it goes beyond just translation. And sometimes we have to do what we have to do because of what we have available to us. So sometimes we have to use a translator, but we have to be mindful of that and understand that this isn't gonna be the answer. We have to find a better way. So being conscious of our provider privilege in the relationship with clients. There's an example of a family where the provider, the family was Mexican and the provider was white. And the provider thought that they had a great relationship with this family because the mom would always come in and was always laughing. And it appeared on the surface level that it was a great relationship. And then the day came when there were some misunderstandings and again, the lost in translation, the communication, being mindful. How the person communicated came off as a threat that they were gonna call CPS. Now this was a family that didn't have, the mom didn't have documentation and they had come in because of a trauma had happened to this family. And so this mom's like, I'm coming in for help and now I'm being threatened of CPS and now, everything's gonna, so then that mom never came back. And she had made some progress with some of this therapy. But what happens in this situation is that the person thought that they had this strong bond with the family, but the reality is that the mom, what could they do but just laugh and smile and go along with it? Again, we think about voice, we think about the consequences of not having documentation. Sometimes there's not a voice to advocate for self because of fear of consequences that might arise, that might happen. So it's about being conscious of this privilege. Even myself, I speak Spanish. My dad's from Mexico, but I am very mindful that I have a privileged relationship in working with some of these families, um, because of the opportunities and the privilege that I have. Um, so these are things to be considered. Um, Carmen, next slide. And so, um, you know, with again, and I see that this is kind of my last slide for today, but again, what I really wanted to share today were a couple key points, key points that I think are important and critical to be mindful of, to be conscious of. Um, so yes, our subject matter is connecting with young women. How do we engage Latina young women, adolescents? But again, my concepts are, we need to understand that we're not just engaging an individual, we're engaging a family, we're engaging a community, and we have to be conscious of these macro level concepts. My colleagues that are going to present here in a little bit are going to focus on some of their more direct work and more of their macro level of how they do it within their agencies, within their services that they provide. So this was kind of setting the tone and giving us things to consider. So I want to thank you all for your time today, and I hope that this was beneficial.
Thank you, Salvador. Don't have any questions in the chat as of the moment, so we can continue on with whoever's up next.
All right, can everyone hear me? Yes.
Yes.
Oh, perfect. So my name is Jessica Elizondo. Salvador, thank you for all the information. Give just some more examples of what I've seen at the Juvenile Assessment Center. And what the Juvenile Assessment Center does, for those of you that don't know, is we meet with clients that have law violations, and we do risk and needs assessments in order to try to divert them from the court process. But just a little bit more information about myself. Again, my name is Jessica. Both my parents were born in El Salvador. They came to the United States in about the 1980s. They were fleeing the civil war that was going on in the country. It was getting really dangerous, so that's when they decided to come here. Both my sisters and my brother and I were born in California, and we moved to Nebraska when I was about 10 years old. I graduated from Central High School. I went to UNO. It's here that I met my husband and my kids, who you see in the picture. My boys are 17, 12, and 11. And again, some of the information that I'm going to give you is just things that I've seen at the Juvenile Assessment Center. I'm going to be making generalizations because everything, you know, is influenced by different things, but these are more of the resounding topics and things that kept coming up throughout my work at the JAC. And I've been at the JAC for 14 years. So if you want to go to the next one. So again, as Salvador said, I really think that when you're working with the Latino population, obviously and he discussed it, we're talking about Spanish if you want to communicate with the families, but there's different things that we have to take into consideration when working with the families. And as Salvador said, some things don't translate directly as you would want it. I mean, I've seen work from others that, you know, you want to put it into the Google Translate, but if you just do like a word for word Google Translate, you're missing the message, you're missing the weight of the words, what you're trying to get across to the families. So just an example of this would be the word regañar. In our assessment, we ask families about discipline and stuff like that. And a lot of times the families say regañar. Well, if you plug this into Google Translate, it says to nag. That is the translation, and regañar would not be to nag. It's an all-inclusive word that is, you know, your kid did something, you're reprimanding them, there's punishment, there's advice, like the feeling of disappointment. It's a very heavy word, but if you take that, then it seems like the family didn't do anything but nag at the kid. So again, just messages are not translated directly, and just keeping that in mind. And like Salvador also said, I think it's also important to keep in mind, especially if you don't speak Spanish, you don't belong to the community, is that Spanish can differ slightly depending on where you're from. Spain Spanish versus El Salvador, Mexico, Dominican Republic, we use different words for different things. And sometimes people are not aware of that, but that can make a difference again in what you're trying to relay or how you understand someone. I mean, just a personal example, Salvadorian, my husband is Mexican. So when we first got together, we would go to my dad's house, and there's a different accent and everything, and we would leave and he'd be like, I have no clue what your dad just said to me. So just keeping those things in mind. And also, Salvador mentioned it as well, there is plenty, not everyone's first language is Spanish in the Latin American countries. There's different dialects and stuff. And, so it's Spanish is not their first language. English definitely isn't. We have to keep in mind those different dialects. And like he said, yeah, personally, I've had to use an interpreter to speak to some Guatemalan clients that spoke Canjoval, which brings me to my next point, the use of interpretation. Using an interpreter is obviously a good way to get rid of that barrier, be able to talk to the families, but I don't want there to be, or at least acknowledge that there is some issues or some barriers that you can come across with an interpreter. And some of that, and I believe Salvador mentioned it as well, is that some of the things don't get interpreted, like not everything does. In terms of the client that I had to use Canjoval, the interpreter, I remember asking this mother, well, what do you do when your child misbehaves? And the interpreter interpreted, and they had like a 3-minute conversation, but all that was said to me was, well, she sits there and cries. I know that in that moment, I lost a lot because I wasn't able to understand that. And there's obviously follow-up questions that you ask, but also just having an understanding that when you are using an interpreter, there's things that are lost. The meaning, just the desperation that you could hear from someone's voice when they're when you're able to speak that language with them. Also, I think just keep in mind that when working with an interpreter, if a family uses one interpreter over and over, it can get to a situation where they trust the interpreter versus you as a service provider. And that obviously can cause, its own individual set of challenges if that's the case. So just keeping that in mind when working with Latino populations, obviously, it's better when you can communicate with that person, because maybe, and especially if you come from the community, you can understand some of the intricacies. So something else that we need to obviously keep in mind, and Salvador, again, you mentioned a lot of my points, so thank you, is that legal status can make a difference in the interactions as a service provider that you will have with your client. Again, I'm coming from a juvenile justice point of view. And when I see families, I have to keep in mind that if there is no legal status, that's definitely going to change the interactions that I have with them. There is a lot of fear involved when you are involved in the juvenile justice system, and that can translate into different, you can see your client act in different ways. A lot of times they want to get done with everything as soon as possible. They, want to just do everything that they have to do and be done. Well, if you don't understand that there's that fear, it can seem like it doesn't matter to them, like they don't care about it, like it's nonchalant, let's just get it done. And that's not necessarily the situation. So I think if you have that in mind, it's obviously going to change interactions. It can also affect what kind of information they give you. They might be closed off because they're scared that if they disclose anything, they're going to get into further issues. And those are, again, things that we have to keep in mind, because it's not necessarily that, it's a resounding fear that they have all the time. this fear of deportation is present at all times. It's one of these traumas that it's an ongoing, trauma that families have to experience. I remember specifically, I was staffing a case. We staff cases with the whole staff, and I was bringing up this idea of this parent was scared. His partner was threatening to get him deported. And one of my coworkers really said something to really diminish that parent's fear. And because I know what that's like for some of my family, I had to, as well as some other coworkers, had to step in and be like, no matter how legitimate this seems to you or to me, because I do have the privilege of not having that fear, it is a fear that's present all the time. So with working with Latino families, I think just having that at least knowledge. So in case you have an interaction, just maybe that's something that's affecting it. So something else that Salvador mentioned is this mental health, like really being kind of like a myth. It's not, many families don't have the education on mental health. I've had families in my office that really refer to it as not real. Particularly, I had a client, and we asked our families, the parents of our kids, about concerns about mental health or anything like that. And the mom, I remember she said to me, well, yeah, my daughter says that she has anxiety and it's affecting her at school and she gets sweaty. But I told my daughter, anxiety is a white, rich people thing, and we are neither white and we are not rich. So I believe she was able to tell me this because I am Latina. I was speaking her language. We built a little bit of that connection earlier on, but because she was able to share that, I was able to have a conversation with her and give her a little bit of education on anxiety and mental health. And she was very open to treating that after we had the conversation. But she did say to me, hey, you know what, you're going to have to help me here because I know nothing about this and I wouldn't even know where to start when it comes to getting anything set up for my daughter. So I think just the point, and it's kind of just to piggyback off of what Salvador said, is that there isn't a lot of education on this. This is still very much so a myth. A lot of people don't seek out treatment for any mental health issues. But like Salvador said, it's like that they don't know about it. Yeah, maybe they've been told, but there's no education when it comes to those things. I mean, kids, if I mention that I might refer them to therapy for services, they're like, well, I'm not crazy, I don't need it. It's seen as a sign of weakness. And the way that we can help with that is obviously, like you said, providing education, but also to sending to service providers that understand that part of the culture, or not the culture, that lack of education, that it's not talked about. There's still, like Salvador said, this belief that things are quiet. You don't really talk about those things again. And just something else that isn't necessarily talked about, that's kind of taboo, because we ask about it in our assessment, is these issues on sexual health. A lot of the families that I work with, they don't openly talk about, sex or protection, or, the changes a female body goes through or a male body goes through. These are things that are generally taboo. Maybe we're conservative. We don't really talk about it much. And something that goes along with that is sexuality, but I'll speak about that in a few minutes. So in line with something that it's not discussed, or something that should, these cultural considerations that you have to keep in mind is these gender differences that I've seen. And as Salvador said, machismo, this is great. It's not part of the culture, but it's a maladaptive practice that's being practiced a lot, and that can affect how kids, and I'm talking about the clients that I serve, the kids, how they're treated. I've seen differences where, and I've talked to several of my coworkers, like they're a lot stricter on the females in the family. They have a lot more responsibilities within the family. There's less opportunities to go out and have social activities. And girls run, and it could be that because then the boys I've seen have more of that freedom, have that because they were told at a young age, well, you're going to be the man of the house. If your dad's not around, you're the man of the house. So they have this feeling, which again is just differences that I see within work. And I can understand some of those differences, but if you don't understand a little bit about why it's happening, then, it can make a difference in the whole interaction that you have with the family. So, and I think Salvador said it very well early on. I think there is this struggle. I am a first generation American I'm first generation born here. And there's this struggle between the culture of, the family where we come from, and then there's American culture. And this can translate into very different things that I feel sometimes are often underlooked. And those things can obviously be influenced by, where you came from, religion, when you came to the United States, how you came to the United States, what the legal status is. And one of those things, and I think that I've seen more often lately, is like this views on school. I've seen a lot of kids lately that come when they're older. They're coming to the United States as older kids. And in the United States, every kid has to go to school every single day. That's the law. Well, when these kids come to the United States at 16, 17, and they come fleeing the violence, the trauma, everything that they're fleeing, and their idea of a better life is, like Salvador said, to work, to contribute to the family, and they're focusing on working. But in the United States, it's, well, you need to go to school. It doesn't matter if your family doesn't have enough to eat, you can't help, you have to go to school. I think that's just a difference that we always have to keep in mind, because we try to put in that mindset of the United States and really don't take into consideration the mindset of the child coming into a country or being here. Even when my husband was young, his expectation was to graduate high school, and that was it. It was no further than that. It was like, well, if you graduate high school, well, that's perfect, and then you can work, and mindsets of that. Something else that I feel, or that I see, is the differences of views in discipline. I've had a lot of families say to me, well, in the United States, I can't do anything to discipline my child. They don't let me do anything here because they want to do more physical. It's not beating your child, but there's some sort of physical component to that. And there's a lack of education in terms of what they could do, So just keeping that in mind. And like, there's this expectation versus rewards points. And what do I mean by that? And I think it's Salvador said it way better than I could. We work as a collective, not as individuals. And I remember we were working on the questions that we asked families. And one of the questions that they wanted us to ask was, well, how do you reward your child for their positive behavior, doing the chores or, whatever. And I remember saying like, hey, this is really not a normal practice. Like, this is part of a contribution to the family. There's no need for rewards if you're contributing, if that's your contribution to the family. And there was pushback from that, because what's normal in the United States? Well, even my kids, they're second generation. It's like, Mom, well, if I do my chores, will you give me an allowance? I'm like, no, your chores are your contribution to the household. So there's different views regarding expectations, you know, and just contributing to the family versus rewards. Like, what am I going to get for doing something for the family? It's not something that I feel like Latinos, you know, like me as a Latina woman, as a Salvadoreña, I'm not going to reward my child for doing something that they're expected. And I do see a lot of that because we did have to ask that question for a while. And they gave me these looks like they're like nothing, you know, if anything, I say, good job, thank you. So something else is just keep in mind that the parent and child dynamics can be influenced on everything. There's like I said earlier, there's this struggle between, you know, your parents and me being a first generation American. And this is just my personal experiences. You know, I was trying to be so quote unquote Americanized, or trying, you know, not trying, but trying to do what my friends were doing. And it caused a struggle because you want to stay true to who you are, to your culture. But there's definitely, you know, issues when it comes to that. One last point that I want to make, because I think it's important, especially right now, is, and because I've seen a lot of it lately, is there's this struggle with youth nowadays, or the population. It's like we're very much so open and discuss the LGBTQ plus community. And the families that I've worked with still have a very big taboo when it comes to that. It's not something that's openly discussed within families. And if a family, I've had families that have, you know, said, well, you know, I think my child is gay or lesbian, and they whisper the word to me. Even in a private office with just two of us, saying the words are very much so taboo. So it's just something to keep in mind, that that's not very openly talked about. And in terms of parent-child dynamics, something I've seen as well is a lot of times when we have second, third generation youth born in the United States, some of the parents still only speak Spanish, and their youth only speaks English. So then we have this language gap, and, you know, cultural gap between the family and the child. So just, and my point was just to give a little bit more about what I've seen in my work. But I really do want to end with, our normal may not look like your normal, like in the United States. My normal might not look like Salvador's normal. There's, you know, different types of normals, which are okay. But when you're working with Latino families, I feel like if you have some of those things like translations and, you know, interpretation and the legal aspect, and what their views are when they come, you're going to have better interactions with those families. Yeah. Any questions?
No questions for you. I have had a couple of questions up for Salvador.
Yeah.
The first one that was asked is, how does colorism affect the Hispanic community, with the Afro-Hispanics being darker skinned in this racial world we all live in?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, there's definitely colorism that happens in throughout the different, I think throughout the whole entire world, right? And I can just speak on just kind of personal experiences. In Mexico, we don't have a large Afro population. In certain states, such as Guerrero, and certain areas where there were slaves that were brought over to work on the haciendas, which essentially were kind of like plantations, right? And that there was mixtures, and so we don't see a big, large population, but there are certain areas. But what we do see that I can kind of mention upon is that when we think of Mexico, a large portion of Mexico is indigenous, right? There's indigenous populations, some that still speak their indigenous languages, some that over generations, it was taken away. And it goes deep, right? This is the understanding history and colonization and, again, these are things that I had to learn about that I wasn't taught growing up. I wasn't taught in school, but things that I had to go out and learn and ask questions about myself. And I think I always challenge my clients, the youth that I work with. I say, I'm sharing with you, but I always want you to ask the question, why? Why are things the way they are? And you're able to find your answers. But yeah, there's definitely that role of colorism. People will frown down upon people of indigenous kind of backgrounds. And even when they themselves have indigenous features, they may not speak the indigenous languages anymore, but it's frowned upon. It's looked upon as lowly. But yeah, so that's definitely something that comes into play within different communities. I think the more white, fair-skinned in the society mistakenly is kind of perceived up here, and you feel it, right? And interactions. And so I think it goes across, right? It's similar into the United States. And I think it goes all across the board into the different parts of the world. But yeah.
And there is another one. In regard to connection and sharing our story, how do you find the balance with youth, young adults, between building that connection and it not becoming about you? I've had some youth share those thoughts about their therapists where they say they don't care about their therapist's service provider's story. For example, they talk too much about their experience rather than listening.
Yeah, I'll share a little bit, but I know Magda is going to probably touch upon this with her presentation as well. But it's like there's no, how do I say it? It's not a science, right? Like, it's something that you feel. You have to, like, those people skills. You have to be able to, for me, the most that I'm going to share about my story is during the first interaction. And I have to set it up. I'm strategic with how I share. I explain it. I say, hey, I'm going to share about my story, about who I am, because oftentimes we're going to work together and I'm going to know about some very intimate things about you. So in order for us to, it's important for you to know a little bit about who I am and why I do the work that I do. And I think that's the key word there, why I do the work that I do. So I share a little bit about my story, not too much, not intense, but enough to let them know who I am, so that they can get to know my personality of who I am. And it often opens up the door to say, now that you know a little bit about why I'm here, tell me a little bit about why you're here today. Or I might ask, a parent, who are you? Some of my adult clients, it's a simple question. I say, I've shared a little bit about myself, but now I have one question for you. Answer it however you please. Who are you? And it's a very loaded question, right? It's simple, but it's like profound. A question that we don't get asked often, that we reflect upon, and that if we're asked several different times, we might have different answers. But it opens up, right? It lowers this feeling of nervousness. This person shared a little bit. And then when throughout our conversations, you find little moments where you might be able to tell a story. So as I'm explaining trauma and I'm talking about that dog scenario, I tell a little piece of my story where I say, well, when I was little, I was 6 years old and I went to Spring Lake. My mom would walk me to school. My mom would walk with this big old stick. And I say, why do you think she might walk with a big stick? Well, because there was dogs loose in the neighborhood, and my mom, well, she's a little bit overweight, so she wasn't going to be able to run, and she couldn't freeze up because she had to protect me. So she was going to fight. And so that's why she had this big stick. So it's finding opportune moments, right, to share little pieces, right? Because it's not about you. It's about when I share a piece of my story, it's kind of helping to prove a point. It's helping to connect and relate. So that's kind of, I guess, and it's something that you learn as you go about and you do. You have to be aware. You watch the person's, uh, what's the word? I'm looking for facial expressions. I'm looking at body language. I'm looking at how they respond, how they react. So I'm very much aware of how the interaction's going, and not just speaking just to speak out of my neck. There are some people that are really good at that, right? They do make it all about them. So that's the key thing, is that when I'm sharing, I'm not sharing to make it about me. I'm sharing to kind of connect, and I'm also sharing to really emphasize a point. So yeah. And I think Magda's going to share some of her strategies and good stuff that she has in place too.
That's great. Thank you, Salvador. That's all the questions for now. So Magda.
Yeah.
Hello, so my name is Magda Batiz Salazar, and I am currently the Xochicalli facilitator for the Latino Center of the Midlands. So I very much specifically work with young Latinas on the day-by-day basis, and it's a wonderful experience. Before we begin kind of talking a little bit more about what we do, who do we serve, and just some observations about, how to really work with these young ladies. We will show a quick video, so I'll have Carmen go ahead and put that video. So Xochicalli is a program for young women, ages 14 through 19.
We lead girls to become better women, to keep their word. I feel it's a group that kind of just like leads you to become a better person.
Just by the first time I went or like saw you guys or met you guys, you could just automatically tell that you guys are very open-hearted, accept everyone for how they are, treat everyone the same love.
We talk about different things during group, but definitely some of the topics that I see a lot of the girls get more passionate about lately has been just like healthy relationships, communication. A lot of them have issues communicating, not just with, like boyfriends or girlfriends, but also communicating with their parents, communicating with their siblings, communicating with teachers.
The difference between toxic, abusive, and healthy relationships.
Mostly like safety of women, like how to prevent pregnancy at an early age, or we learn about our culture, deep topics like that. I feel like they were really opening just because we don't talk about that anywhere else. So I feel like this was like a really safe place to like come to talk about things like that we would experience like outside of school and work.
I think for right now, the group is mostly young Latina women. And so for a lot of them, a lot of the issues that they're dealing with are issues that I dealt when I was in high school as well. And so for a lot of them, when they come up to me, they're able to relate to me because also there's a lot of experiences that we share.
She's really supportive during our group. I feel like she really influences us to pay attention a lot. She's really like willing and like passionate about what we're talking about. So she wants us to focus on that and really be there at the moment.
She's a great mentor, first of all. She's like someone you can rely on in any situation. She always has your back in anything. She's going to tell you things right from wrong straight up. If you're going through something, first person you can run to is her, and she'll receive you with open arms.
I am also her student advocate at South High School. So as their student advocate, I do see her at school most days and help her out with whatever is homework or any other issues that are going on. And so because of that, I see her a lot. So we've been able to develop a really good mentor relationship.
She's impacted me a lot just because she helps me a lot with school, and her support. I feel like she really influenced me to continue with my schooling. So until like my last year when I had applied to a scholarship and I got it, I didn't think I was going to get it, but her support with helping me actually write the essay for the scholarship and stuff, I feel like her support really like got me to where I'm at right now. Without her, like I wouldn't be in college, I wouldn't be here, I probably wouldn't even like continue like to have come to Xochicalli.
Ceci was a student that started Xochicalli. So she was already a student when I started facilitating. She started being that example for other young ladies to follow, especially her senior year as she was
stressed out applying for scholarships, applying for college. The other young ladies were kind of like, oh my gosh, she really is doing this.
It is a really great experience to just even just meet new people or like try and make new friends, because you have like that one common thing that you guys go to group together.
So whenever you walk in that door, they always greet you with a big smile, always have some gossip, something new that goes in their school. It's like a family to me. It's a community where we help each other out in any situation in or outside of school. It's girls helping each other in girl situations.
I would encourage you to come to Xochicali just because it's a really nice place with people. I feel like the support is endless. Like you're gonna get something out of it. So you're gonna get a good friend or someone to talk to. You're gonna have like a safe place to go to. You'll have a support system. If you don't have support anywhere else at home or in school, you'll have it here.
Joining it taught me that there's a certain line to things. There's boundaries, and that there's many other things you can do to cope with things that you're going through.
They make it seem like a home. Like they make it seem like it's a place we can go to when we don't have anything else.
I think if I could tell my girls in Xochicali one thing, it is that no matter, no matter how much they might slip up or mess up or something may not go right in their lives, like we'll be there.
You're gonna get something out of it. So you're gonna get a good friend or someone to talk to. You're gonna have like a safe place to go to. You'll have a support system. If you don't have support anywhere else at home or in school, you'll have it here.
If I could say one thing to Magda, I would say to keep doing what she's doing, honestly, because she might not know it, but in reality, she helps so many females in general to better themselves.
I see them grow over the years. And so for me, it's very moving to know that I'm able to make an impact in this young women's life and to see them grow and make sure that they know that they're capable of doing things. It's nice to see that, okay, I do make a little bit of a difference here and there. Mm-hmm.
Hi. All right. So, yeah, very emotional after seeing those students speak. Oh, I wasn't expecting it to be so moved. But Carmen, if you would like to actually stay there for a minute in that slide. So you might be wondering, Xochicali, this name, even our young ladies have a hard time pronouncing it at times, whenever we present it, people struggle sometimes. But the name was really created right here at the Latino Center by my coworker, Carmen, and I think Salvador had something to do with that as well. So thank you, Salvador. But it really comes from the word Xochitl, which means flower, and then Cali, which means home. So we really are trying to create that space for these young women to grow, to evolve, to flourish as the young ladies that they are, and to continue being, the best version of themselves that they can be with the support that we can provide them. So yes, next slide now. So we will, this is just kind of like a quick overview of, what we're speaking about. So just kind of the purpose, what it was that we do, some of the core teachings of what we do. And then I will briefly talk a bit about some of the sessions that we do. And then again, how do we create that safe space for these young women? So next slide. So the purpose of Xochicali really is that belief, and as Salvador mentioned, we are, very big believers of that collectivism, that we are a community. And so oftentimes in our culture, back in the day, it was all about guiding young people into that stage of adulthood. We don't all know how to be adults. We don't all know how to be people. At times we struggle, we fall even as adults. And so we need other people within our life to help guide us, to help assist us in those moments of growth, in those moments we're not sure what we're doing and we need some support. So we want to be that support to these young ladies, as you saw in the video, to really feel that they have somebody that when they think that maybe they need help, when they want some space to talk, when they want somebody there, we want to provide that space to guide them through that into feeling like they're, transitioning into young women that can make an impact in their lives, that can make an impact in their communities and continue to give back. So that is the main purpose of our group, for Xochicali sessions, of our whole philosophy for doing what we do, is to really help them and guide them into growing as better young ladies. Oh, next slide, Carmen. So the program is a 16-session program. So the young women have 16 sessions that they complete with us. And it's really aimed for those young ladies ages 14 to 19. We do have some middle schoolers at times that when they're struggling and they need that extra support, we welcome them into the group. We just have conversations with them because some of the topics that we do touch, maybe their parents may be uncomfortable, or maybe they themselves may be uncomfortable. But as long as they're willing to be part and put some of their efforts in, we welcome them into our Círculo. And it is based on a national curriculum that came out of California called Joven Noble. So we do have some sessions that are for young men as well, but for the young ladies, we do the Xochicali sessions. And we really, like we said, it's guiding these young ladies through these rites of passage, through being a teenager, through being a young adult, because oftentimes in Latino culture, it's at 15, you become a woman, allegedly. But really, it takes a lot more. It takes a lot more thinking, a lot more self-discovery, and a lot of more support from within your community to reach that stage. And so we are there to provide those young ladies with that support. And in the next slide, I will talk some of the core teachings. So Joven Noble has 4 core teachings that we really do adhere and that we really do believe strongly as we continue the sessions with these young ladies. And that is, as Salvador mentioned, conocimiento. That's a key part of what we do. And we do spend quite a bit of time with the young ladies doing this portion because it is truly acknowledging them as humans, acknowledging that where they come from, what are their backgrounds, what are they dealing at home? Are they, are there immigrant young ladies? Are they late second generation? Where are their families from? What are the values that they hold? It is a way that we want to really acknowledge them all as people, as a whole, because they are, even if they're teenagers, even if they're young people, they have so much and they have so much to who they are. And so we really want to acknowledge them and greet that with happiness, with a smile, because we're excited to see them and we're excited to get to know them. And as Salvador said, we do share about ourselves too, because this is not a one-way street. This is a two-way street. And so we do share about ourselves too. And we don't take over the Círculo speaking about ourselves, but we do share about ourselves because it helps them relate and it helps them see that perhaps if we had similar experiences, I can teach a lesson out of my own experiences. And this is something that actually, when I first started facilitating, was a struggle because I very much, going to school here, going to college, they teach you when you're going to work with people in social services, keep it all to yourself. It's all about the client. You don't share about yourself. But the more I worked and the more I saw with these young ladies, I started to notice that you do have to share part of yourself. In order to make that connection, you have to be willing to open up as well, because there is value in that in order to make that happen and that relationship be as impactful as it can be. The next core teaching that we do is entendimiento. And so that's, again, knowing that the world is changing and knowing that for a lot of these young ladies, there's different things going on at home, then there's things going on in school, there's things going on in the community that they live. There's all this different social things going on in their life, and they're trying to really, find themselves within that and find who they are within that. And sometimes as teenagers, that's the stage also of life where you're trying to figure out who you are and you're pushing boundaries and you're trying to figure out what is it that's your purpose in life. And so one of the things that we truly believe is helping them find themselves, helping them find what is that purpose that they have in their own lives and what is it that, they can continue to grow. Because there is a belief that every single child, every single person, you have gifts and you are somebody that can add on to this society. And so how do we help them figure that out? Because oftentimes, if young ladies hear on media, on social media, on TV, and everything, they talk about how they talk about Latinos, how they talk about the different culture, their culture, how they express themselves about, like, oh, you're just going to get pregnant and, drop your pad. If they only hear this negative thing, sometimes it can limit them in what they see themselves as. And so we try to show them that they can grow and that they don't have to limit themselves to just these negative stereotypes of what their culture is, but that there is a lot more positives as well, that they can grow and that they can continue going within their lives. So really finding that purpose, finding that mission that they're here for. And even it takes time. As you saw, sometimes I still keep in contact with students that were here since high school and they're in college now, and still in that journey with them, still walking alongside them to help figure out what is it that they're looking to do. And then there is we have integración, so integration. So again, is understanding that there is so much within it, and that sometimes when girls are afraid or girls are seeing themselves in such a negative light because of stereotypes that they might hear. I had young ladies that, are being doubted by, for their abilities in their schools, in their families, because they're a young lady or because they're a young woman or because whatever, they're Latinas or they have an accent when they speak English because they just got here a few years ago. And to really let them know that that's just people outside of them that don't know who they are. So the key to it is knowing yourself, knowing who you are, knowing your culture, your values, the community that you come from, so that you can really start to put that image of that positive image, using your own culture as a way to build yourself in a positive manner. How do we use that? How do we keep it going? That's a key for us so that we can get them out of that isolation that they sometimes go through at times when they're, in high school and feel like nobody understands them, feels like their parents, they're like, my dad doesn't want to let me go out, or my mom says that I have to stay and take care of my siblings and she doesn't ask that of my brother. And it's like, okay, let's talk about what's going on. Let's talk about what we can do, or why do you think that's happening within your life, and how can we get past that? And then again, the last one, movimiento, it's providing that space, having that space for young women to feel safe, to feel that they can express themselves, that they can be themselves as whole people. And again, continue to acknowledge that, yes, there's obstacles. Yes, there is lots of things going on in your life. But this circle that we have is to give you some positive skills to help you grow through those moments. And again, kind of get rid of some of those maladaptive mechanisms that they have learned as they have grown, because oftentimes some of these young ladies become the second mother in their homes, sadly, because mom works a lot. And so then they have to, take that role on, and they ignore their own needs at times. And so bringing light into, again, what are your needs? What is it that you need? And we're here for you in providing that space to really let themselves, let everything out, express themselves, and really feel that the space is for them to be as open as they can be. So I'll have the next slide. I'm just going to touch base on a couple of these sessions that we do that I think are important, especially we're working with this population. And I know that Jessica and Salvador mentioned a little bit of it, but we do talk and we go over all these sessions with the parents. We say this is what we're going to talk about, because there is a lot of questions and there is a lot of stuff when it comes to pregnancy prevention and STIs, because as we said, it's not something that's necessarily discussed openly in a lot of the households. When I ask the young ladies, have you ever had the talk from your parents? Barely any of them raise their hand. And it is because it's still something that it's not necessarily openly discussed, but reality is young people are having sex. And so we are going to have to discuss it. And we're going to have to discuss what is the safest ways, what is comfortable for them. And also making sure that they know that just because their partner wants to do it, they don't have to. And if they want to, like, okay, how can we do this in a smart way? How can we protect you? And how can you be protected? And not just in a way of like, we're protecting you or you're protecting yourself, but you're really taking care of yourself. You're taking care of who you are and, knowing the consequences of what you're going to do. One of the things I like to remind my young ladies is to think critically. Again, if you're going to decide to do something, let's think of all the things that can happen and let's figure out if that's worth it. And so we do a lot of that as well. We also talk a lot about identity, who they are. And I like to say that with identity, we're not just, we're focusing a lot on, again, where's your background? Like, are you proud of who you are? Are you proud of your culture? What are those values that you hold? But also, again, what are the other parts of you that add to who you are. So one of the questions asked about colorism. So we do have some young ladies that are from Costa Chica, which is a part of where there's a lot of Afro-Mexicans. So how's that different? Your experience as a young Afro-Mexican than, the different experience of another Mexican girl that may not be from there. And how does that add to who you are and to the person that you're becoming? And we also talk a lot about, again, with identity, what is sexuality, gender, who are you? Like, who do you like? Because again, for a lot of these young ladies, they have no other space within their lives where they can be openly themselves or where they can feel like they can truly share who they are. And so we try to provide that space for them by opening up. We meet in a círculo because we want them to be able to feel like this is a space where they can express themselves in an equal ground. Nobody has more power than the other in this, I'm there to help, but it's really, we all want them to share. We do a lot of emotional regulation. And so one of the things that I like, it's kind of one of my little things that I also talk a lot about is young women are often seen as dramatic, as, catty, they're full of emotions, and realistically, yes, but they're also full of passion, they're full of emotions, just like young men. They just communicate differently. It's not that they're more dramatic, it's not that they're more emotional, they just communicate those emotions in a very different way. And so we have to be able to validate that, and not saying that whatever their behaviors are or whatever the feelings is, we're saying that they're okay, but we're sitting with them in that moment of emotion. Say it's a moment of grief, a moment of excitement, a moment of happiness. Sit with them in that moment and be with them in that emotion. And then after that emotion passes, okay, let's process what happened. Because oftentimes I think we run the risk of minimizing our young ladies' thoughts or young ladies' feelings. And when we minimize them, we really are minimizing their whole experience, and they're humans just like anybody else. They're just on a growing stage. And so I want to be, caution people to not minimize our young women in their thoughts, in their feelings, in who they are, because I think it can get in the way when you're working with them to really connect. If in your mind you're thinking, oh, they're just being, dramatic, or they're just being this, really sit with them in those moments. And that's how you connect with them. That's how you get to learn about them. And they see that you're really there for them. You're not just there, because you're getting paid. You're there because you want to be there and you want to get to know them and connect with them. You're meeting them where they're at in their life. And so, yes, we do teach them also how to regulate that, how to regulate those emotions. And then one of the other things that we talk a lot about too is we do, so what does it mean to be a woman? Since a lot of the women, young ladies that we serve right now are Latinas, we talk a lot about what is the image that they get told by media, by society, that what does it mean to be a Latina? And for a lot of them is like, oh, reggaeton, dancing, going out, clubbing, and things that maybe, it's like, okay, yeah, those are some things, but is that all there is? And so talking about those examples of women in their lives that they see as women, that have palabra, that have their word. And when we think of that, some of these young ladies are thinking back to their grandmothers. Some of these young ladies are thinking back to their sisters, their tias, their aunts, their godmothers. And it's beautiful to see, because sometimes I feel like they think they're alone, but when they start thinking, they start seeing these examples of women in their life that they can really follow as an example to follow. And lastly, we talk a lot about palabra, so having word. And that's something that we reiterate during our sessions, and it's just 4 little simple things for us. It's just keeping your word for them and not doing anything to hurt themselves or hurt others, taking responsibility for their actions, and then just being that positive example. Those are our key main things that we kind of over and over keep going with them, because they can really be the foundation for them to keep growing from and to guide decisions through. So we do go through that a lot. And then we can go through our next slide. So in more, in a more specific terms, in terms of creating a safe space, when we do our círculos, or circle, as we say it, we meet within a circle. We literally meet around, we all sit around, as you saw in the video, and we meet because it's really an equal ground for us. I don't see myself as a teacher. I'm not teaching them anything. Realistically, I'm guiding conversations with them. I am just the person that is there and that has the really the gift to be the person that can see them grow. So we really do try to be conscious about that. So we do create norms in our group. So it's not just that I'm telling them, these are your rules, this is what you have to follow, but having them create the rules themselves, the norms of the group of what they need to feel comfortable, so that they start, feeling that taking ownership of this, because this is their space. I want them to feel ownership over the space so that they feel that this is, a place for them to grow. So we do meet in the circle because, as we said, healing happens in a collective. I think one of my favorite authors, Bell Hooks, said it that rarely, if ever, any of us are healed in isolation. Healing is an act of communion. And communion is meaning, again, exchanging those thoughts, exchanging those feelings with one another can really lead to some of that healing. Again, this is not a group that's a therapy necessarily, but it is a place of healing for a lot of these young ladies. It is a place for them to really heal themselves and grow through it. We're also very intentional about our physical environment that we have. For a lot of these young women at home, maybe they have, like 5 siblings, maybe they don't have their own room, maybe at school they don't have a locker. If they go to a big school, maybe they struggle with feeling like they have a space of their own. So we're very intentional about it so that they feel that this is their own space. This is their Xochicalli space. So a lot of the times when we do activities, I ask them if they would like me to post up their posters, their pictures, their whatever art they do, and they want to post it up because they want to feel that sense of ownership. And so I have girls that come in before group even starts and they ask, can I be the person to set up the space? And I said yes, and then they set it up on their own. They put quotes around the room because they're really taking ownership of the space, which again, I think it's so important because it's the one space in their life where they oftentimes feel like that's theirs and they share it. And then we do a lot of one-on-one check-ins. You're seeing how they're doing to see and, get to know them more. And one of the really great things about our group too is that we do have an ongoing group. It is every Thursday at 5:30 for years. And so they know that even if they haven't been to group in a year, I'll have randomly a girl that hasn't been in group show up and she'll be like, is Xochicalli still going on? I'm like, yes, do you want to stay? And they're like, yep. And I'm like, okay, let's go. Which is a great experience because then you have girls that have already graduated after their 16 sessions. They don't have to come back, but they want to come back because they continue to see our space as the one place where they can really get rid of all those burdens that they're carrying, all that baggage that they're carrying, and to also celebrate and share the gifts that they have gotten. So with our young lady like Ceci, when she got to college, when she got that scholarship, you bet all those young ladies were screaming and celebrating, and they were so excited to see her grow. And then when our young ladies go through moments of downs, they really support each other too, which is, I think, something that's important to teach them that, they can be there for each other. They can grow with one another. So I think that's all for Xochicalli. So if there's any questions or comments, let me know. If not, I'll pass it on to my coworkers.
There was one question for you.
I have a question, I believe, from someone.
Yeah, is your program available in other areas of the state?
Oh, there was some.
There's a couple, but the one that came in first was, is your program available in other areas of the state?
So at the moment, we only have the program at the Latino Center of the Midlands here in Omaha, Nebraska. And of course, that would be the most exciting thing to continue growing and have this opportunity for other young ladies, because what we truly believe in the core philosophy of the program, it's not just for Latina young ladies. It can be applied to any person, any girl of any background. And so we're hoping.
And I think the next one that came in was, do you have a good turnout for Xochicalli?
Yes. So, it's one of those things after the pandemic and everything that happened, we, try and rebuild that momentum to keep the students coming. But we do have, right now we have about 17 young ladies enrolled in the program. And so it's something, or maximum is 20 at the moment. So we really try to continue pushing. We have a lot of young ladies also who graduate and want to keep staying, and we have to, ask them to give space to young ladies who haven't gone through the program, but then they continue coming here and there. So we have a pretty good turnout, thankfully, at the moment.
Good. Does this program take place at South High?
We don't have it at South High School, but we have it. The Latino Center is what, like 2 blocks away from South High School. So it's pretty nice because a lot of the young ladies will walk after school to the Latino Center. They'll be here all afternoon doing homework, talking, getting to bond. And then when group starts at 5:30, they all help set up the room. They all help set up, and then we start our círculo.
Okay, great. I think that's all for questions, so we can move on.
All right, thank you.
Can you all hear me? Salvador, can you hear me? Thumbs up. Awesome. Right. Good morning still. My name is Malaga Espada, and let me take this off. And currently I supervise our talking circle groups, our programs here at the Latino Center of the Midlands. I'll be talking a little bit about the parent component of our programming. Besides supervising, I am also right now facilitating our parent group at the Latino Center. Our parent group is called Nemilisli. Formerly it was called Cara y Corazón, or which translates to face and heart. But I won't be speaking strictly about the programming, but more as to the really simple and what I would say common sense things that we do. But common sense, if it's not always common. So I won't be concentrating on the program, but just how we interact with the parents, how we get the parents to buy in into the program, and how we create that sense of safety and bring down those barriers that a lot of times our families come with just from having perceptions about working with community agencies, or when they become involved in the juvenile justice systems or things like that. But before I do that, Carmen will play a video for us, and this is one of the parents from our parent groups, just talking about her experience in participating in that specific program.
Within the Latino Center, we have the Nemilisli group, which works with the parents, and that group meets at the same time as the Young Women's group meets. And so it's at 5:30 every Thursday. And again, it's one of those groups where a lot of the support comes from within the group.
Aquí en el programa de Nemilisli están para ayudar a las personas que vienen con necesidades con los hijos.
The parents, when they come together, they know that they have each other as people that they can kind of get an opinion from, get some advice from, similar life experiences, similar cultures. It's a group where they can really kind of delve deeper into, okay, so you've been through this, I've been through this, how did you get through it? And then give each other advice.
Me han ayudado bastante dándome opiniones o consejos o diferentes problemas que he escuchado con los padres o situaciones que tienen.
Sometimes they feel that there's like a miscommunication, that their kids are not listening to them. And so trying and creating that space for the parents to be able to learn about how to really be a parent in the United States in some ways, because so many of them are immigrant parents, are parents who didn't grow up here, don't know much of the school system here. And so how do we, as the Latino Center, come and help them?
He tratado de comprenderlos más en cómo ellos tienen, digamos, dos culturas diferentes. Uno como hispano, él viene de diferente cultura también. Es difícil comunicarse a veces con los muchachos y para ellos es muy difícil comprender los padres que ellos tienen otra forma de ver la vida.
One of the big goals of Nemilisli to really have the parents think about who they are, what their cultures are, and how can they, in some ways, reach out to their kids in a way that can go with the rules of America in some ways and get themselves in that same page.
Me han ayudado en escucharme en apoyarme, y a veces uno piensa que no tiene el tiempo para las reuniones, pero uno tiene que hacer ese espacio porque es algo bueno que es para uno mismo.
Right. I think I'm back. Salvador, 1 second. Thumbs up. Can you hear me? Awesome. Can we go to the first slide? So in working with the parents, like I said, I don't think I am bringing you guys anything that is common sense. But I think these are things that sometimes we forget. As service providers, a lot of us, we're busy. This is hard work. You all know, I don't have to tell you guys this. So with how hectic things get and how many families we work with and how many issues we hear, sometimes we forget about these little things. But when it comes to family engagement, even before engaging the families, and I think this is something that we all practice here. I can only speak for my team, for our program, which is Pathways to Success. I think this is something that we do as a whole when it comes to engaging the parents. But even before engaging the parents, when we receive a referral or a name of a family that needs some sort of service, before we engage them, we have to think of our approach and our tone. Whenever I see a referral, I'm reading about this family on paper, about this youth on paper, it is natural for us to, when we read the details as to why this family is in diversion, or why are they coming to our program or whatever, it is natural for us to start forming these ideas of, oh, okay, this kid is, got in trouble because of this or this or this or this, or there may be decisions in the family, but we have these ideas from what we read. But I think that we're very, very intentional here at the Latino Center of getting to know the family before we assume making any assumptions. So our approach for working with the families is that we want to be a familiar face. We want to be somebody that they are comfortable talking with. You heard Magda, and I think everybody has mentioned it about creating this safe space for the families to be able to open up. For me, when I engage the families, that's what I want to do. When I came to the country, I came to the United States when I was 17 years old. All I knew how to say were my numbers from 1 through 10 and yes and no. That was it. After going to school for a little while, I had to, after going to school for about 6 months, my mom figured, oh, he knows enough English, he can help me out, he can translate for me. So I had to. And there was one point where my sister's gonna hate me for this, but my sister ended up in diversion. Yeah. She won't see this. She ended up in diversion, and I had to go translate for her. I had no idea what was said. Up to this day, I still don't know what was said. I don't know what the officer told me, but I remember his tone. It wasn't Jessica. It wasn't. She's right next to me. And she's asking me. It wasn't Jessica. This was in Norfolk, Nebraska, years ago, 1999. But I remember the tone of the officer, and I could tell right away he didn't like us. He wasn't there to help us out. We were just a name that he needed to check off a list. I was there trying to translate. He hated me being there because he couldn't understand what I was saying, and I don't blame him. I could barely speak the language. But like I said, I remember his tone, and it stayed even to this. I'm 40 years old now. I still remember that tone, and I remember his face. I don't remember his name. I don't remember where his office was, but I remember the tone and his face. And those are the things I keep in mind in working with the families. I don't want to be the person that they remember, oh, this guy treated me like this, or he was mean to me, or he had this tone with me. No, I want to be somebody that is there that they know that is there to support them and help them out in whatever way we can. I think for us to keep this in mind as a service provider, it goes a long way in bringing down those barriers that the families may have. For families that come in contact with us, I'm talking for all of us in general, they may come in contact with us because of some sort of issue that happened in the family, some sort of negative issue. And when we or the family is referred to our agencies, we may be seen as the punishment. So that's also something that we should all keep in mind. The family may already come with this notion that, oh, this happens, so now I have to go talk to Mahatma, and this guy's going to be mean. He's going to tell me what to do, all of this. And those are barriers that we can bring down. Those are views that we can bring down by just changing our tone, our approach. And it's things very, very simple things that we can do to bring those down. By the way, when I mean your approach and bring a support, it being somebody familiar, you don't have to look like them to be familiar. By the way, I know where it's a bunch of Latino people talking to you guys right now, telling you, this is what we do. But I am telling you, for you guys to be able to connect with our families, you don't have to look like us. You don't have to look like us at all. All that you have to do is be true to who you are and be there for the family. You have to be there for the family. You have to want the best for the family.
Gee, hey, I'm at work right now.
I'll wait for him to be muted. I think we're good. So the familiar face, like I said, you don't have to look like them. You just have to be there for them, want to help them. It just be true. People, families, youth, they'll call you out if you're not being true to who you are. They'll tell you, and they'll see it. They'll see right through you. Like I told you guys, that diversion officer that I met years ago, I could tell right away he didn't like us just by the tone, just by his approach. Can we go to the next slide, Kevin? So once again, going back to this idea, of being mindful of thinking why the family is working with you. This will affect a lot of how much the family shares, how much they open up. If they are being forced to work with you, they may not want to share a lot of information. They really might tell you as little as possible, just to try and get you out of the house if you're doing a home visit, or to try and get out of the center ASAP, because they don't want to be there. It happens at times where, often actually, where, the people in the community approach us and they want to participate in our programming. But when those families are being told to join us, we have to be extra mindful of bringing down those barriers. I can remember this one occasion I had to go to do a home visit. And this is where we have to be very mindful. We're all doing the same type, a lot of the similar job in our community. And sometimes we can make things difficult for each other if we don't watch our tone, if we're not mindful how we're engaging these families. So I went to do this home visit a while back, and it was a young man that needed to join our Olin group, which is our young men's group, very similar to Xochicali. And I knocked on the door, and usually I have a parent that will open the door. This time it was the youth opened the door, and I asked, "Hey, it's your dad home?" He said yes, he's in the kitchen. So I waited at the door. I'm like, "Okay, could you tell him that I'm here for a meeting?" And I kid you not, I couldn't see the dad. He was in the kitchen. There was a wall that was separating us. I could only see the living room, but dad could hear me that I was talking to his son, and he yells from the top of his lungs, "Here's another explicit community worker that's here to do a job that they're not good at and blah, 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 just went off, right? And I just said, yes, hey, my name's Mahatma. I'm here from the Latino Center, talk about Olin. And he just said, I still can't see the dot. He just said, yeah, you can come in. I'm right here in the kitchen. So I came in, he's washing dishes. His back is turned towards me. So he's still not acknowledging me. And he starts telling me about this other agency that had come prior, trying to help his son. He felt very, very disrespected by this other person that had come. And he was associating me with the same organization. We had nothing. We didn't work at the same place or anything, but because I was a community worker walking into his home, trying to bring services to the family, we're all the same, right? In his mind, we're all the same. I was going to be the same type of person. I was going to disrespect him and all this. And he's still not acknowledging me. He's washing dishes, his back turned toward me. So I'm like, okay, I got to figure this out. So this is where the common sense comes into mind. As soon as I knew that he wasn't interested in services, then I stopped thinking about services. My priority changed to, I gotta get this gentleman in a better place. I gotta show him what I'm about. And this goes back to what Salvador talked about, self-disclosure. Somebody asked in the chat, how much do you self-disclose with the youth? Well, here's how much do you self-disclose with the parents. You self-disclose enough to connect. So when the parent was talking and saying all these things, I managed to hear an accent very similar to mine. So I asked the dad, nothing related to the intake, none of that. I just said, hey, so where are you from? And he's like, oh, I'm from El Salvador. Like, boom, there's a connection. I'm like, oh, cool. I was born in Nicaragua, which were neighboring countries. So Jessica and I were like this. We're neighboring countries. And that's all it took. He turns around. He's like, oh, another Central American. And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, hey, how are you? Then I started asking, how long have you been in the country? Just nothing related to the intake. And those little things just completely changes his demeanor. As we talked, it turned out to be that his wife, he was married to a lady from Nicaragua. So that even helped my cause even more. So it just changed the conversation, but it took me being mindful to make this person feel comfortable and more at ease for me to be able to carry out the intake. We had a long conversation. Can you go to the next slide, Carmen? I believe this is. Yes, we had a really long conversation. Still not related to anything having to do with the child or why I was there, but just getting to know him getting comfortable with me, and eventually we got through the intake. It's this small things that make big differences in the families. I had to show them who I was and why I was there for them to be able to open up a little bit and allow me to bring services to the family. Here on the slides, you can see, too many voices can become disorienting. And I think that's something that was happening with this family. They, like I said, they've had multiple service providers go to their homes. That was very, very confusing as to what his son had to do, why he had to do it, why people were coming to his house and asking all these questions. So he was really confused and really overwhelmed with all the things that he had to do. But once I managed to bring down those barriers, all that I did, I talked about our programming and what his son had to do. So I tried to keep things as simple as I can and talk in a way that he could understand me and understand what the requirements were for his son to bring down all that level of anxiety. Sometimes I think for us as service providers, I know we want to help Um, but when we overwhelm the families with information, we're doing more of a harm than good. And we got to be very, very careful with how much information is presented. Recently, I had a parent that called me. Um, she was terrified. Terrified. She said, "Hey, I got an email from a probation officer about my son. This parent doesn't know English. She has an email. She received an email. She didn't understand what the email was. She was really frustrated because she knew that her son had been released from probation, but she's still getting emails. And she's calling me. She's like, "Can you read this email? I just don't know what it means." So I told her, "Yes, I can help you. Just come to the center and we'll figure it out." Um, she ended up not being able to go because she has two jobs. So she sent her son to come see me at the center. And really, it was nothing. She kept getting all these emails from their last probation officer that it wasn't anything related to the case. The kid had been released already, everything was good. But mom kept getting all these messages about other resources in the community that could help her son, but she didn't understand what it was. But the email it wasn't a big deal, but her fear was, right? And these are the things that we're trying to prevent because we're not able to sometimes explain what's going on to the parents, or because we're overwhelming with information. There's this anxiety and this fear that becomes so big that a lot of times, if they don't have anywhere to go to or anyone um, to check in with, um, they'll just freeze. They won't know what to do. That's why a lot of parents, if you work with parents, parents tend to miss meetings, and a lot of times it's because there's so much going on. I work with families that work with a psychiatrist, a therapist. They're required to go to parenting classes. They have to do community service. There's so much and they still have to keep up with one or two jobs, keep up with their kids, take them to school. I know we're trying to help, but we have to be mindful of what the family dynamics and how they work and what challenges they have for us to be able to provide really effective services. Can you go to the next one? Salvador mentioned this too, and Jessica, and I think all of us, once again, when we work with the families, we keep in mind that the family it's a unit made up of individuals, and we have to get to know both. When I work with the young men, or Magda works with the young ladies, we also bring in the parents. This idea, and Salvador brought it up, the collective family system, the circle. We work with the circle. We don't work with just the kid or the parent. It's the circle as a whole. We're mindful to learn about the family as much as possible. With our intakes, we're mindful to take, it takes a long time for our intakes, I'd say, not a long time, usually about an hour. The first parent I mentioned that I went to his house and he wasn't very receptive, that was an intake. I think that took about 2.5 hours. The first hour was just de-escalating the situation, and then we did the intake. But we're mindful to take that time to get to know the family, to know what the family dynamics are, to what the challenges are, to understand how they communicate. When it comes to cultural things that we do, each family is different, and each person is different. But a lot of times, I've heard these comments from some service providers that some homes seem as unhealthy because of the volume, how loud the parents talk, and the tone. Really, you gotta be careful with those, because depending as to where the families are from, the tone, if the volume is high, it's normal. If you go to my household back in Nicaragua, we are loud. We're always yelling, but we're not fighting. So, there's this misconception at times that, oh, if there's high volume, then it's an unhealthy environment. No, you got to be careful with those things. There's nicknames too that people call each other with love. But if you don't know these things, you can see it as a negative when it's not, and this can get some of the families that we work with in trouble. And you can see at the bottom, what may sound rude to you, it really may not be. It's just how families communicate at times, and this varies, right? This is not like the norm or anything, but you have to be able to understand the family, where they're coming from, where they're from, how they communicate to be able to manage this. Is there one more slide? Um, so once the family opens up, like I said, take your time. Take your time. Let them speak. Like I told you, with that family, with that gentleman, I let him speak for 2 hours. Um, that doesn't happen all the time, by the way, but that's what it took with this specific family for me to be able to get in and help out and communicate and engage and connect. um, you have to gain trust. Going back once again to self-disclosure, being able to share a little bit, uh, disclose enough so that the family can get comfortable and get to know who you are, why you're there, what you're about. I am nobody here. I'm not. I know Salvador just called us an expert, and he just left. So when I say I'm not an expert on anything, don't tell him I said that. Um, all that I want to do is make the families comfortable and feel if they come to the center that they will be safe. I want them to know that if they trust their child to me, to instruct them, to have sessions with them, that they can trust me, that I will teach their son something that will help them. When it comes to the parent group, I want, man, that's huge that the parents have decided to trust me in our Nemilisli group, because one, I'm not a parent, I don't have any kids, but they still know that within the program, and Magda explained that in the video too, that we're there to help each other out. Everyone's story is different, and everyone's story can help us deal with different issues. I don't have to be a parent to be able to facilitate the program, because the parents are helping each other out. But it's all about gaining that trust with the parents. It's showing them who you are, where you come from, being available. And this is hard sometimes for us, because it is a hard job. And when families know that you are there and that you're available, they will reach out all the time. And this is where we have to have a balance, take care of ourselves. But you have to be available for the families. Our families, especially, they may not have a set schedule. They may not be very familiar with 9 to 5, this is when you can call me. And it's they call you when they're in crisis. And a lot of times that's in the middle of the night, that's on weekends, and you got to be able to balance those things. But you have to be available. Really, it's in those small moments when they open up the door and they need you. If you're able to reach in, that's what makes a difference, for these families. All families, the very last point here, and I don't know if there's another slide, but we'll see. All families have baggages and gifts. We as service providers, we tend to hear about all the baggages, all the negative, this is why the family is in diversion, or this is why, or probation, or this is why the family is coming to Olin or Xochicali because of this issue. But when I am connecting with the families, yes, I hear about these things, but I also ask about the gifts. What are the good things? What are the positives? What's your child doing that he's doing good? Our parents in the parent group, when I started facilitating it, um, they would tell me often, yeah, I'm in this program because I'm a bad parent. I know I mess up a lot. I made these mistakes and blah 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 blah. And I don't dismiss their opinion, but I tell them, but you're here. That's huge. The fact that you're here tells me that you're trying to do better and that you're already doing better. What other things are you doing better? So we try to balance the baggages with uh, gifts within the family, and gifts, good things, positive things that they're doing. Parents really, for us, for Carmen, Jessica, for me, our parents made some sacrifices coming here to the States. Um, and a lot of the parents really, they do those things, and then they kind of like forget about it. So in the parent group, a lot of times I had to bring it back. Remember all the sacrifices that you had to make to be able to be here. And yes, your child might be struggling right now with some issues, or you might be, but look at everything you've accomplished. Parents here, because they don't have any schooling or college degree, they put themselves down, and really they've achieved amazing things, and they've done crazy things, sacrificed so much, but they put those things on the side, or they tend to forget. I think for all of us as people, we tend to concentrate on negatives. Mostly we forget about all the good things that we do. I do that a lot. So it's good to remind the parents, no, look at all the amazing things that you've done and all the awesome things that you've been able to provide for your children. But it's all about reminding them and balancing those gifts and baggages within the family. Is there another slide? No. So that's my last slide. I think I got through everything I wanted to say. I don't know if there's any questions, comments.
There haven't been any questions for you. We are getting close on time. However, I wanted to let everyone know Carmen is up next, and I want to give her her full time. So we're going to stay on. You can stay on if you like. If you have to jump off, this is being recorded and it will be posted on the Douglas County website. So if you have to get off and you missed the end of it, you can always go back and view it again. So Carmen.
Hi all, thank you, Deb. As Deb said, a lot of the things, well, if you have to go, please do. And if not, please stay. A lot of the things that I will be going over are some of the things reinforcing pretty much what everybody that you have heard has shared with everybody, with you all. But I'll start. My name is Carmen Chagoya. I am the Senior Program Manager for the Pathways to Success program. I have worked here at the Latino Center for the last 7 years. I've been blessed enough to have grown within the organization and have seen our Pathways to Success program really grow. A little bit about myself. I was born and raised in Mexico. And when I was about 10 years old, my parents brought our whole family here to Omaha. So I came in, learned the language, grew up here in South Omaha. So it's been a blessing for me to have been able to provide services to give back to my community, everything that I received when I first got here. So soon after I graduated from college, I started working at a high school, and that led to me working here at the Latino Center, and I've been here since then. So some things as we work with families and things to keep in mind are some of the things that I'll be sharing with you all. So one of the key things to always remember is that parents, just as much as we've talked about, and a lot of you may be youth service providers, remember the parents also deserve that space for growth, that space for support. And it is our responsibility as service providers to provide that space to them. It may be hard. As everybody has said, it's hard and it's time consuming, but we have to make sure that we take the time and invest the time in providing that safe space for the parents. We have to have realistic expectations when we meet with the parents and know that they're not going to self-disclose right away. We have a saying that we all my Latinos in here will know. It's la ropa sucia se lava en casa, or don't air your dirty laundry in public. And so that's something you're like, wait, what is that? It's something that we always talk about, hey, our problems, we solve it in our family. We talk about it ourselves. You don't go out and this random person, regardless whether they're from the community or they have different letters after their names, they're not going to tell you their issues right away. So it's about making those connections with them. It's about taking the time, it's been mentioned before, go beyond the check boxes and the paperwork. A lot of the times we're so quick and we live in this society that's like, go, go, go. So just make sure that, you put down your paperwork, you look up to the person in front of you, and you actually start having those conversations. When we talk about culture, know that, as it has been mentioned before, you don't have to share the same culture in order to be culturally aware. Know that in order to service our families, to make connections, you don't have to be Latino, you don't have to be Hispanic. So just make sure that you are aware of your own culture or your own cultures in order for you to use that to connect with the families. And that's going to maximize your connections. That's going to maximize the impact that you're going to make with families. I know, again, another thing to keep in mind is that there's diversity among all Latinos, everybody from here. We just heard about, even within the same countries in Mexico, we have different cultures, different languages, different beliefs, different customs. So just keep in mind that we have to embrace that. As service providers, we have to make sure that we learn about our family's culture, and that we appreciate that, because a lot of the times as they're moving here to the United States, that's one of the few things, if not the only thing, that families have left from where they come from, because they leave all their support systems. They leave their, native language. They come, they get the culture shock. So we have to also embrace, and we have to, be non-judgmental. We can't judge them if they've been in the country for 20 years and they still can't speak English. That's something that we have to, it's a reality, and we have to keep it present. Family dynamics, we already talked a little bit about, how the family functions, how it works, how they're made up. But one of the things that I would like to point out is that a lot of the families, when we talk about family, it may be people that are not blood related. So when we talk about families, when we want families to come into our intakes or to our meetings, sometimes they may be brought by an aunt or a grandma or a neighbor, because that's their support system, because they don't have, the mom or the dad may not be available. They may not even be in the picture. So the adult of the household may be an older sibling, or it may be another relative. So again, let's keep that in mind whenever we are setting expectations, whenever we are having meetings, or whenever we are asking for families to meet us. And, when it comes to expectations, let's make sure that our expectations match our client's reality. At the end of the day, we're all in this because we want to make sure that our clients are successful, that our community members are successful. So let's not create more barriers for them. Let's level up with them. Let's meet them where they're at. So ask ourselves, are our expectations attainable for their current situation? If not, what can we do? So with our program in Pathways to Success, we do follow a curriculum. It's called Check and Connect, in addition to the one for Círculos, which is Joven Noble or Noble Youth. So it talks about the 4 A's to engage families. And those 4 A's are approach, attitude, atmosphere, and action. So I'll go through each of them. And again, some of the things will be connecting with some of the aspects and information that has already been shared. But when it comes to us approaching our families, I already mentioned it, slow down, build the relationships, be mindful of how we approach our families. We talked about the native language. We talked about using interpreters earlier. And, Jessica mentioned it, Salvador mentioned it. One of the things that I really want to make sure to mention is, if you are using an interpreter, make sure that you are directing your conversation to the parents. Make sure that you are talking to them. Don't talk to the interpreter. The interpreter is going to do their job. You have to make sure that you are talking to the parents, because you're building the relationship with the parents. If not, what's going to happen is that the parents will build the relationship with the interpreter. So then they will reach out to the interpreter and they won't reach out to you. So just be mindful of that. And a lot of times for some service providers, that's okay, that's fine, that's easy. I don't have to deal with it. The interpreter can deal with it. But that's not what it is about. So please consider that as you are talking and having conversations with a third person, and that third person being an interpreter. And place yourself in the parent's shoes. Think about how hard it is already for them to be self-disclosing about their traumas, about their challenges, and then trusting 2 people. One, sharing the story with you, and another one believing that their story is being interpreted the right way. So you, as a service provider, you also have some power in the conversation. Trust your gut. Trust that, okay, as Jessica mentioned, with her situation, she knew that she had already missed some information, but you can also trust your gut. Okay, is this information being relayed to me the right way? Is it being interpreted the right way? And if your gut feeling says no, ask more questions and ask the interpreter, are you really saying what I'm saying? Is this what I'm hearing? And again, it's important to make that contact and that directing that conversation to the parent. Be reliable, be dependable, and follow through. Always, always, always. I know that this is not just for Latino families, but for any family. You want to get the parents, it's very challenging working with parents. We do the best that we can in our program, but that's one of the most challenging things to do, is to get to work with the parents. But parents will know when you're reaching out to them, because it's almost time to have a court date, because it's the end of the month and it's time for monthly reports and you have to get your touch base in. Parents will know when you're just calling them just to get a touch point or just to get a contact in. So just make sure that you are really making those connections with the parents, and you don't have to call them for something negative. You can just say, hey, I just want to follow up. I want to make sure that if you're in, I guess, education, I want to make sure that, Carmen did her homework. And, if you're in the juvenile justice system, I just want to make sure that you guys don't forget, you guys have your, drug test appointment. Just the little things that may take 5 minutes. It takes time, it does, but we have to invest the time. We have to make time. And when you call them back, even if you don't have an answer, it's okay to call them and just say, you know what, I don't have an answer for you right now, but I just want to let you know that I did some research, or I try to find out, and I'm going to direct you with somebody else. So again, calling them back, even if you don't have an answer. Avoiding scare tactics with parents. That's a huge one. They're intimidated by being referred, by having to work with you. A lot of the times what we do in our program is that instead of saying referred, we say nominated. And I know that works for our program, but again, thinking of strengths, thinking of the positive aspects of things. So, just also avoid your tone of voice, as mentioned by Mahatma. Avoid using scare tactics for parents, because it's already intimidating for them. And you don't want them to put more barriers up. You want to make sure that they're more comfortable. After you approach the parents, check your attitude. It's been already mentioned, but a lot of the times when we get the referrals, when we get the nominations, when we get the paperwork, before we even meet the family, we've already had some sort of perception of who the family is. Why are they here? We're already judging them. We already have this whole idea of what the family dynamics may be without even knowing the family. If we even get a description, or if we even get a reason why they're being sent to our program. So just make sure that before you meet the family, scratch that off, get rid of it. Don't judge them. Don't blame them for being in the situation that they're at. And believe that parents are doing the best that they can in raising their children. I'm not a parent, I'm a step parent, but I know that it is hard to be a parent. There's no book, there's no manual that tells you exactly what to do. And we even say for our own sessions with parents, they're not parenting classes. And we're not here to sit and tell you, no, we're going to teach you how to be a parent, because that may look very different to everybody. So again, make sure that you really believe that parents are doing the best that they can. And there's a saying that says people do better when they know better. So let's take responsibility in actually coaching and teaching parents, not teaching, excuse me, showing them and supporting them in doing better. For all of us that do work with youth, service providers, especially if you work very close with youth and you just incorporate parents every so often, avoid taking sides. This is one of the things that, as you're practicing active listening, as you're listening to the stories, a lot of the times we hear a lot from the youth if we work directly. And this happens, and we share a lot in my team because we're school-based for some of it. And you saw the work that Magda does, you saw Mahatma does similar work. And so a lot of the times when we hear the side of the stories of the youth, we already have an idea of who the parent is, or how the parent is going to react when we reach out to them. But until we hear the parent's story, we really can't judge them. So please, please, please do not antagonize parents based on the youth story. And I'm not sitting here telling you, parents are always right. No, because we've seen that. But just keep in mind that when it comes to working with parents, you have to listen to them. You can't go into a conversation, into a meeting with the parents and right away assume that they're guilty or that they're doing something wrong, because parents are going to shut down. And there's not going to be that consistency that we're looking for in the services that we provide, and then the services or the consistency for things to be followed through at home, which I'll touch base in a little bit. Another thing is what may seem as an uncaring attitude may be caused by a barrier that's being overcome. You know, we may think that parents don't care about their children because they're not showing up with them to an appointment with us. But do we know if parent is even allowed to get out of work? Because a lot of the families that we work with work in packing houses. They have jobs, they have multiple jobs, and they can't just drop everything and meet us to what's convenient to us. So just make sure that you keep in mind that, you know, what we perceive as an uncaring attitude from parents may be a barrier. So we need to also find out, and again, go back to having that relationship with the parents. When it comes to creating a safe atmosphere, make sure that you are creating a welcoming environment despite the location. And I mean anywhere, you know, whether you meet with families in your office, whether you meet with families in a school setting, whether you meet them in a parking lot, just make sure that you make them feel safe no matter where they're at. You know, be sure to thank them for showing up, because a lot of the times the fact that they showed up is a win. And we tend to forget that, because whether it is because we're so busy, whether it is because, again, I go back to the check boxes and the forms, we just have to make sure that the families may have had to overcome a lot of things in order to make it to the meetings. Transportation barriers, childcare barriers, you know, getting out of work, you know, and if they can't make it to you as service providers, are we making it possible for us to go to where they're at? Can we go to their jobs so they can see us during their break? Can we go to their homes? That's something that we practice in our program, doing home visits. That's important. That's a great way to make connections with the families. You know, when you have the conversations with the families, make sure that you make them feel comfortable and have a conversation with them, not talking to them. And this has already been discussed, and, you know, having that two-way communication. Practicing flexibility with hours. Are we able to, you know, I know that a lot of our jobs are 9 to 5, 8 to 4, but are we able to meet families after 5 o'clock? So I'll keep going. So this is my last slide, but I wanted to really reiterate, it doesn't matter how you approach the families. It doesn't matter what attitude you have, and it doesn't matter how safe of an atmosphere you create. If at the end of the day, you don't act on it, you don't put some actions behind everything that we just said. So just make sure, you know, actions speak louder than words, excuse me. Make sure that you take parents into account whenever we're talking about problem solving about their youth. I go back to the last slide. Don't talk to them, talk with them, have that conversation. Parents should be equal partners in the success of their youth. You know, make sure that we have, if we can, at all possible, provide options for the parents, not just tell them, okay, well, this is what you have to do, and you have to do it. And it's like, okay, well, can you do this or can you do that? Also, let's be as accommodating as we can, because we want to make sure that the families are successful, right? We want to make sure that we don't see the family again. You know, we don't want to, especially in the juvenile justice system, we don't want it to be a rotating door to see the families again and again. So let's empower parents or help them step into their power so that there can be consistency with what services we're providing on site. For example, for us here in our agency or at school, to the same things that can be translated at home so that parents can feel empowered. Because a lot of the times, you know, they can have that power when we're in our meeting, in our office. But once they get home, the youth overpowers them. And so they're so intimidated and so scared to, whether it is discipline, even have a conversation with their youth. So that's one of the things that we have to also do so that we don't enable them, so that they have the power to really act on being a parent at home. One of the important things that has worked with us, especially through COVID, is take action in making appointments face-to-face. Phone calls are okay, but face-to-face interaction is really valuable in our community. We talk about it. We were actually talking about it before the presentation. When COVID hit a couple of years ago, we provided our services virtually, whether it was because it didn't really work, whether it was because, everybody was trying to do the same thing. Everybody was tired of looking at a screen. We know that, yeah, we were getting our meetings done. Some families were logging in, but the quality of our services was not the best. So then we had to think outside of the box, and we had to make it happen for families to come in person. So if you can make appointments face to face, that's really valuable for our families. And above anything, remember to recognize the parents' involvement. There are parents that can really not care, but if they're showing up, or if they're following up with you, or if they're, doing things, make sure that you recognize that, make sure that you encourage that behavior. So that is all that I have for you all. Any questions? No,
I don't see any questions in the chat. Thank you, everyone that stayed on. We really didn't lose all that many people, so this was very valuable information to them. I will be sending out certificates, hopefully within the next week, hopefully by Friday, but I'm not going to promise that. I'll say within the next week, I'll get them out. And I'll also have the link to the trainings and workshops area on the website, so that you can go back and watch any of the trainings that we've had so far on there. And again, that'll hopefully be up within the next week. So thank you, everyone, for attending. Thank you, presenters. This was awesome. Very good.
thank you.
Thank you. All right.